Welcome to Speak Out, Stand Out by Green Communications, where we're learning how to help our kids become better communicators. We believe our voices are the strongest asset we have, and our mission is to empower the next generation to use their voices to make a difference in the world around them. Whether you are a parent, an educator, or are just invested in today's youth, we hope this podcast will help you build confidence in our future, one voice at a time. Welcome back to Speak Out, Stand Out. I'm Elizabeth Green, and today's guest is Suri Nowosiolski. Suri is a licensed clinical social worker, and she primarily works with children and teens who struggle with anxiety, depression, emotional regulation, and social communication. She is also trained and certified in a wide variety of therapeutic modalities, including PCIT, which is what we're here to talk about today and how this relates to communications. Suri, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, it's my greatest pleasure, Elizabeth. Thanks for having me.
So, Suri, just to kind of dive right in, what is PCIT and how does this relate to communications?
So PCIT is parent-child interaction therapy, and it was created somewhere in the 1970s by a doctor by the name of Dr. Iberg. And the primary application of PCIT from the 70s all the way through today is really for behavior management of children ages 2 to 5, I would say, is sort of like the sweet spot for PCIT. And it really is heavily based in the behavioral technologies. So really looking at how changes in the environment can positively impact a child's behavior. So often parents who are specifically reaching out because they're looking for PCIT clinician, they're primarily coming in with a child who's got problem behaviors. So 2-year-old who's tantruming, a child who just won't listen, the kiddo who's under the dinner table and won't come out, those sort of things. Now, over the years, the wonderful people at PCIT International have developed different ways of applying the model. So they've tweaked the modality somewhat. And so there's now a toddler component. So for the real littles, there's a PCIT CALM, which is a type of PCIT which targets anxiety and exposure to anxious emotions, anxious situations. And they've also developed an older child protocol because as parents, we know that problem behaviors don't max out or stop at the age of 5 when the original protocol kind of topped off. So, so that's something that, I use somewhat in my practice as well. And PCIT is basically broken down into 2 portions. There are 2 segments. The first segment, which is called CDI or child-directed interaction, is the part that really builds language in children. And what we've found is that when we teach parents these CDI skills, the child-directed interaction skills, very often before we even get to the parent-directed portion, which is the second segment and where we really teach children how to listen, how to follow directions, we often see huge changes in behavior. And I strongly believe, and I think the research really bears this out, that the therapeutic play skills that we're teaching parents to implement and use in their interactions with children really help children to feel more connected, more grounded. We usually will see an increase in language, an increase in emotional regulation, an increase in the ability to stick with a task for a longer period of time, and to boot, much stronger attachment between parent and child. And what's lovely is that PCIT breaks these skills down into really teachable steps and components. So it's really easy to learn. I will just throw in that the parent directed portion, I think of late, there's really been quite a bit of controversy about, how that works with, children's nervous system and how it aligns with things like conscious parenting and things like that. So I really here would like to focus on the child directed portion, which I think is just good interaction skills for any parent.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great. And so just to kind of reverse for a minute, at the beginning, you said you work a lot with children who are exhibiting problem behaviors. How do we know, is our child just a 2-year-old throwing a tantrum because that's what they do? Or is it a behavior problem that we need to look into solutions for? Or is this a solution for all of the above?
That's a fascinating question. And actually, my son, who's the father of 3, called with exactly this question this morning. They have a 4-year-old, that's their oldest. And he wanted to know, is this typical or is this a problem? And what was he was describing was absolutely typical. What I often tell parents is, if it's not a problem, it's not a problem. Don't make an issue of a tissue. The children at 2, 3, 4, 16, 26 will have breakdowns. As adults, we know we have meltdowns too. They may not look like a 2-year-old meltdown, but we do meltdown. We become anxious, overwhelmed, angry. Big feelings are big feelings. What I would say to parents is, if it's getting in the way of the child's ability to engage in the things that 2-year-olds are supposed to be engaged in, if it's taking over their day, then it's worthwhile asking the question, is this a problem? And the other piece is, when you're talking about children, they're not being raised in isolation. They're being raised in the context of a family and with caregivers. So it may not be a problem for the child, but if it's presenting a problem for the family system or for the caregivers, well, that's a problem too. And parents may need some skills either to manage their own reactions, which we know is extremely important, or to help their child manage their emotions and behaviors.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for clarifying, because especially, and first time parents have no idea, is this normal, or I hate to use the word normal, but you know what I mean? And so that's a nice way to be able to determine, is it causing a problem? So let's talk about then those play skills that you referenced above. What does that mean? What are these things and how do they help?
So play therapists use a very specific set of skills when they're interacting with children. And what PCIT does is essentially teach those really good play therapy skills to parents. And the way that we remember them is by the acronym PRIDE, PRIDE. And what I recommend when I'm doing parent coaching and even specific response or intervention for children with problem behaviors, regardless of the age, doesn't matter whether we're talking about a 2-year-old or we're talking about a 14-year-old, one of the foundations of healthy attachment and good parenting is spending individual quality time with each child every day. And I would say that the recommended length of time is about 10 minutes. So 10 minutes of uninterrupted time. That means not responding to texts, not scrolling through on social media, and no other children or distraction around, really focused on orienting towards that child in an activity that you both enjoy. And that's really, really important. As parents, we're often busy, distracted, doing 10 things at once. And when I lay this foundation out for parents, they're like, easy, no problem. I've got this, right? Check in a week later. So how'd that go? And they're sweating bullets like, oh my God, Suri, I never imagined it was going to be this hard. Parents often overestimate the amount of uninterrupted one-on-one time that they're spending with their children. So I would say that the context for the skills that we're going to talk about is that individual one-to-one time. We're not talking about watching YouTube videos. We're not talking about playing video games. We're talking about interactive play. The first, the first of those skills, P, stands
Mhm.
for praise. And this is where we're looking to be really mindful of specific labeled praise. And what this does is really, well, first and foremost, help to reinforce and increase the behavior that you're praising. And the more
Mhm.
specific a parent can be, the more likely it is that you're going to see that behavior again. So if I said to you, Elizabeth, great job, would you have any idea what you need to do in order to get another smile and great job for me?
No,
You'd have no idea.
no.
But if I said to you, Elizabeth, that was a super great introduction that you gave for the podcast. You were clear, you were direct. Would you know what to do if you wanted to get that same feedback from me? Totally, totally
Mm.
clear.
Yeah.
Um, Besides showing that approval and kind of increasing those positive behaviors that we're noticing, what the specific praise does is it slows down the interaction so that we're really dialing into details. And it sends our child the message that we're not just big picture. We're really noticing those little things about you. Great job sitting still. I love how you use that strategy to figure out how to get the puzzle piece in. Things like that. I love how you solve that with a calm body. Those are all specific labeled praises. The second skill, R, is for reflect. And this can be a little bit challenging and it looks different for younger children than it does for older children. I'll start with the younger children. When we talk about reflecting, we're essentially talking about number one, allowing the child to lead the conversation. Remember, we're talking about child directed interactions. So the overarching theme of this is the child is leading the way. And what we're doing here is we're essentially paraphrasing what the child says. So for a young child, they say, if you're coloring, I drew a tree. Parent would say, yeah, you drew a tree. Now that would sound, for an older child, that would sound very patronizing. But for a
Yeah.
younger child, it's slowing down the interaction enough that the child understands from moment to moment that you're really there with them, you see them, and you're reinforcing the use of language. So as soon as a child says something and is acknowledged and understood for what they say, we see that the rate of the use of language, verbal communication, really increases. And, I can think of a particular child that I worked with that was fairly nonverbal at the start of PCIT. And the child would say things like, yay, or oh. And parent didn't really feel like there was anything that they needed to respond. But as soon as the parent started to imitate, really reflect that sort of language, the child was able to feel like, oh, those little bits that I'm throwing out, those matter, they're noticed and they're responded to reciprocally. They're not just passed over. What we saw
Mhm.
was that little yay or oh, or stop, that those sort of increased in length and in frequency, which was really, really nice.
Oh, wow. So let me ask you a quick question. So in this child directed interaction, we're doing something, we're playing together, something that, that they enjoy to do. After we've praised them, we just wait for them to start a conversation? Do we prompt it? Since you said it's child directed, so we just kind of keep doing what we're doing until they begin talking. Is that right?
That is exactly right. That is exactly right. And when I get to the do nots of child directed interaction, you'll see that we're actually not going to be asking questions. So that's one of the no-nos.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, parents often spend their one-on-one time asking questions. How was your day? Do
Yes.
you want to put the red block on top of the blue block? How about we move the train over here? Okay. And that would actually
Yeah.
be a little bit of a direction. What we've found and what the research shows is that when we're asking questions, we're actually putting a demand on the child. And that demand is for a response. It's very subtle, but when I ask you a question, um, Do you feel comfortable just letting the question hang without responding?
No, definitely not.
That would feel really awkward, might feel disrespectful. It's certainly
Right.
not what's within this, the range of social norms. So when we ask a child a question, we have to recognize that we're doing the same thing. The child will not usually feel comfortable just letting the question hang. And so that takes the reins back in the parent's hands, and it's no longer child directed. The
Okay.
parent puts out the question. Now I'm leading. I'm expecting a response from you in return. So to answer your question, no, we're not, we're not asking questions. We're not trying to direct a conversation. Take that off the agenda. The purpose of this time is to be with my child,
Okay.
to notice them, to praise them, to follow their lead. What we know are the positive byproducts of this is that language increases.
Okay. And now is this one more question before we move on to the I is I know this is directed for the younger kids. Is it very similar for our tweens and teens or the same
Absolutely.
process?
Absolutely. Same process. So the labeled praise, absolutely. For older kids, there's a certain rate that we're looking for in terms of when we say, okay, a parent has this skill, a therapist would be monitoring and coaching throughout and kind of looking at how many labeled praises does a parent put in. The rate of labeled praise for an older child is lower because it would be very odd. It's just not natural in the communication with an older child or a teen. So, we really start, kind of relying more on those nonverbals, fist bump, thumbs up, a smile, way to go, loved how you did that, and not as much reliance on the specific praise. So that's a little bit different. We want the conversation
Okay.
to be more conversational with older kids. In terms of the reflections, we're certainly not parroting back the way that we would with a young child. So if a young child says, I'm putting the caboose on the train, the parent would say, you're putting the caboose on the train. And then you can throw in a label praise. I love how you did that. Right. With
Mhm.
with an older child, we're not going to parrot back. We're going to summarize. We're going to paraphrase, and usually add in a little bit of of information. So if I'm playing checkers with a 10-year-old, and they make a move and they say, "Oh, I'm going to move my piece over here," I might say, oh, I see you moved your piece over there. Why did you decide to do that? And, well, actually that would be a question. So we'd want to avoid that. But seeing if you can add on a little bit of information, you moved your piece over there. I'm going to move my piece over here, in response. So you're just sort of building it into more conversation. But really
Okay.
making sure that you're not letting communication bids sort of float away in the air. We're really recognizing them in this 10 minutes.
Everything they say.
10
Okay.
minutes.
Okay. Yes. No, this makes sense. And I'm so glad you explained that because when you were talking about, repeating what they say, I could see my 14-year-old being like, what's wrong with you, mom? Like, wouldn't work with that age group. Totally see this. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
so no, that's very clear. Awesome.
And
Thank you.
that's why, and that's why PCIT really is developed for the younger set. It's 2 to 5 is really that kind of age range. Yes, there are adaptations for older kids, and I can kind of throw in, where those differences are. In kids older than 5, if we were to stick with this original version,
Mhm.
it would sound very patronizing, very stilted, and that's not what we want. What we really
Mhm.
want is to use this in the younger set to lay out the foundations of communication.
Okay. That makes great sense.
Yeah. So the I in pride is for imitate. And that basically means I'm doing what you're doing. If you're building blocks, I'm building blocks. If you're playing with Play-Doh, I'm playing with Play-Doh. If you're drawing, I'm drawing. This is where you're letting your child lead, and you're not doing what many parents do, which is, oh, look at the tower that I'm building, when your child is building a garden with their Legos. And by imitating the child's behavior, and it does not mean, it's not the nonverbal version of reflection. We're not imitating as in they put the green block on the blue block, we put the green block on the blue block. That's not what this is about. But this is about parallel play. We're behaviorally in our actions, we're demonstrating I'm aligned with what you're doing. I think your ideas are great ideas. I'm here with you. That really is, and it builds self-esteem. If I think that's a great idea,
Yeah.
I'm going to do that too, right? That really tells the
Right.
child, I value your play and I value what you do.
That's great. And easy, especially, I always say that I have a problem, not I have a problem, I have trouble pretend playing. I think a lot of adults do. We lose that ability somewhere along the way. And then when the kid tells you you're doing it wrong or whatever, right? So it's so much easier to just follow their lead and do what they're doing. You don't even have to think about it
Yeah,
or overthink it. Like I feel like I overthink it when pretending. So no, I think these
absolutely.
are fantastic tips.
If you and I were, doing child directed play together, and I didn't know how to do the pretend play, and you said to me, "Suri, you're doing it wrong." Most parents would say, "I'm not doing it wrong," or kind of gloss over that, and I would say, "I'm doing it wrong." I'm going to validate what you're saying by reflecting that back, and then I might say, "I'm going to watch to see how you do it." And
Oh, okay.
I'm going to do what you do. And that really, again, it's sort of an externalized version of what we call co-regulation, where I'm co-regulating using my nervous system energy to co-regulate with my child and help them regulate their emotions.
That makes sense. Okay. And again, a very different take on things than I would have ever done. I would say I'm not doing it wrong. I can do it how I want
Yeah,
in nicer words. So no, these are
exactly.
fantastic tidbits.
And Elizabeth, keep in mind that we're talking about practicing these play skills in those 10 minutes a day of child directed interaction. So we're not doing this all day, every day. There is time to say, I'm going to do it the way I do it, and you can do it the way that you do it. But for 10 minutes a day, we're really letting our child know, I've got what to learn from you. I like what you're doing. I appreciate your play skills. So I think that's
Okay.
really, kind of fabulous. And
Yeah.
D in pride stands for describe. And I think when we're talking about communication, this is really, I think this is really where the money is, because describe is the element where we're going to be basically kind of like a sportscaster, describing
Mhm.
what we see our child do as they play. Um, I noticed that you're making a tower. Oh, look at that. You've drawn a tree next to the sun. Oh, the Play-Doh fell. You're picking it up. We're literally just sportscasting. We're the, announcer. We're verbalizing and describing what the child is doing. And what this does essentially is it introduces an element of mindfulness for the young child. Young children are not usually very mindful. They're just busy. And
Mhm.
when we can slow them down by attaching words to what they do, we're making them mindful. We're letting them know that we're mindful. We're letting them know that they're seen. And we're also introducing tons of vocabulary. For a young child, you're building a tower that's bigger than the other tower, right? It's just an opportunity to really introduce lots of different words. And if a child gets distressed during play, it's a wonderful opportunity to introduce language to describe their emotional states. I see
Mhm.
you're feeling frustrated. I see that you're feeling really disappointed that you didn't get what you wanted. Young children, and I would say even children 10, 12 years old, often they know they don't feel good. I'll ask her, how you feeling? Bad,
Yeah.
uncomfortable, right? I think the new descriptor that I hear very often is bored.
Yes.
Children are bored. They're checked out. Uh, it's rare that a child has good emotional literacy where they can really tell the difference between I'm angry and I'm disappointed. Disappointed means something didn't go the way that I wanted it to go, and I'm disappointed, right? That's different than angry. It's different than annoyed. And children often have a hard time. The best way to teach it is in the moment. I can describe you're crying. You're feeling really sad. You're feeling disappointed. You're feeling frustrated. Again, that slows the interaction down. It shows that I validate, I'm with you, I'm aligned, and really brings a mindfulness element to the play, as opposed to we're busy for 10 minutes doing something and I couldn't tell you what we did for 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, this makes sense.
And the last piece, most important, E for enjoy. It's so important for parents to practice playfulness, really enjoying. If a parent comes to their one-to-one time with a child and they're checking the watch. Is it almost over? Is it almost over? Busy with their phone on the side or, calling out instructions to other people. It sends a message to the child that I'm not all that excited about being here with you. And for those 10 minutes, the message that we want to send is there's nothing more important to me than being here, enjoying this time together. So those are the PCIT pride skills. And what the research has shown is that, yes, it's a great foundation that for what follows in PCIT, which is the parent directed portion where we're teaching children how to comply, how to follow directions. But as a standalone, these are brilliant skills for parents to use in their interactions with their child. So of course, we want to just spend time just being, but if parents could take the 10 minutes a day, even 5 minutes, if, for a younger child, and really be mindful about how they are in that time, we see great improvements in language and emotional regulation and emotional literacy and ability to pay attention and all those good things.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, it's very clear. I wish I would have known this strategy many years ago when mine were little. I think that it does sound, like you said at the beginning, harder to do than we imagine it would be, but at the same time, simple enough that we can do this, right? We can do anything for 10 minutes, even if it is, not playing what we want to play, to put it like that.
I think what parents most struggle with are the don'ts of that child-directed time, which, as I mentioned, no questions. Even a tag-along question. You did a good job, didn't you?
Oh,
No, that's a question.
Okay.
You want to avoid that. The other is criticism. So anything that would be perceived as critical of what the child is doing, not during that one-to-one time. Why don't you put the caboose on the other side of the train? Well, that's a question, and it's also kind of it's critical. It sends the message that I don't really like the way that you did that. And the last piece is no commands. So we're not telling our child what to do. Even move the Play-Doh a little bit away from the edge of the table so it doesn't fall down. That seems very helpful, but it's still a negative. It's still a direct command. And so we want to be really careful about both avoiding direct commands and indirect commands during this time.
And that in itself would be very challenging. So it's good to be thinking about that, because we say things like that all day long as parents without ever considering that it could come across to them as a negative. So
yeah, absolutely. And as parents, we have so much that we need to get our children to do. I usually, when I'm doing parent coaching, will teach parents about this, 4-to-1 ratio of positive to negative, or 80-20. Is that something you're familiar with?
I'm familiar with the 80-20 as far as like business goes, but not parenting.
There we go. Okay. So parenting, I'm not familiar what that looks like in the business world, but I will tell you that a good ratio of, positive to negative interactions between parent and child is about 80% positive, 20% negative. And often parents think, oh yeah, that's a breeze, no problem, until I tell them that any instructions or direct or indirect commands, they count as a negative. Go brush your teeth, put your glass in the sink, put your backpack away. Those are negatives, and parents are often shocked. Well, of course I need to tell my child to put their backpack away. And I'll often ask them to put themselves in their child's shoe for a moment. So imagine you come home from a long day at work and your partner says to you, Elizabeth, put your computer in the other room. How does that land for you?
Not well. No.
No, not well. What if your partner said to you, go brush your teeth? You feel you're rising, right?
Yes.
Take off your pajamas, right? So yes, there's an element of we need to use direct commands to get things done, with our child. And that's why the ratio is 80-20. It's not 100% positive, 0% negative. There is room for that. But it's important for parents to really be mindful of how much time they're spending ordering children around, which does not feel warm and fuzzy. And when we see children emotionally dysregulated, one of the first things that I'll ask parents is, what do things look like at home? Do children feel happy and comfortable? What does the interaction look like? Is it 80-20? Often by being mindful of that 4-1 or 80-20 ratio, a lot of behaviors that were previously problematic turn themselves around.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. Harder than it sounds.
Absolutely. But it seems very impactful. And you discussed the ways that you have personally seen, but also studies showing that this absolutely makes a difference. And like we discussed, I think before we hit record, how communication is so key to everything that we do, and building those skills in our kids, even when they're just learning to speak, especially when they're just learning to speak, is so crucial. And so this seems like a fantastic way to do it. So Suri, really quickly before we wrap up, so could you, for those of us with the little bit older kids, like the tweens and things like that, could you quickly walk us through the pride, how we can implement that, but in a way that will work with our children?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So with the older children, we're really thinking about the praise, dialing back on the very specific praise in terms of the frequency, but making sure that we're noticing the things that we appreciate about what they do. And I would say that weaving them in to normal conversation is important. And I think one of the things parents can do before they implement any of these skills with older kids, teens, is just notice for a day or two how many times you praise your child. How many times you're noticing something specific that they do. And I would say that for older children, it doesn't have to sound like great job putting your dish in the sink. It could look like, hey, thanks for putting your dish in the sink. I noticed that you did that without me even having to ask. Or just, I appreciated you helping with the cleanup. That is specific enough for the older child. In terms of reflecting, we are definitely not parroting back, disrespectful, odd, awkward, all of the things. But we do want to paraphrase. We want to let our child know, I heard you. If a child comes home from school, a teenager, and says, I got invited to a party, but I'm really feeling uncomfortable about, the supervision or what's going to be happening at the party, for a parent to paraphrase that back and say, it sounds like there's something about going to the party that's really bothering you. So using different words to demonstrate, I got you. I really heard and I understand what you're saying. The imitating, if you're in a play situation with an older child, a 10-year-old, we're just doing what they're doing.
Okay.
For much older children, teenagers, it may just be conversation. And that means that we're fully engaged. We're not talking while we're typing up, a report for work or, balancing our books or things like that. I'm where you want to be right now. You're drinking a cup of hot chocolate. I'm drinking my coffee. We're together, kicking back, whatever it is that we're doing. for describing, I would just say this is really where we're noticing what our child is saying and what our child is doing. We're obviously not sportscasting for an older child, but if you're playing a game of Stratego, oh, I noticed that you've got a strategy over there, that sort of thing. And then the enthusiasm, the enjoyment is exactly the same. We want our child to know that we're enjoying being with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And these things, you've said so many things that I have been thinking that I should be implementing in my life and with my parenting, and just thinking about when I try to have conversations with my kids, oftentimes it's when I'm fixing dinner, which is fine, right? Like I want to have conversations with them at any point in time, but I don't, and especially being a work from home mom, I feel like I don't often just give them my sole attention where I'm not doing something else. And if that alone we can do, that shows them that they're important to us and we value what they say and what they think and what they feel. If that is all we do, out of these steps in a given day, that's a good thing, right?
Absolutely. And if I can borrow from a metaphor that Dr. David Grant uses when he's teaching brain spotting, he talks about the therapist being in the tail of the comet. The client is the head of the comet. The therapist is in the tail. And I think it's a wonderful metaphor for how we want to spend time with our children when we're doing this child-directed sort of interaction where we're in the tail of their comet. I'm following where you're going. And there's something wonderful for a child to be validated in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Suri, this was fantastic. Very, very helpful to me, and I'm sure to those listening. So if anybody would like to learn more about this and about you and what you offer and what you do, tell us a little bit about that. And I know you have a free workbook too. So tell us a little bit about those things.
I do. Yes, absolutely. So I have a free workbook for child anxiety. It's linked in my Facebook page and Instagram. So I don't know if you'll post that in the show notes.
Yep.
It's Parenting for Anxious Kids. And my website is www.surimsw.com. Resources there talk a little bit about the work that I do and access to my blog and that sort of thing.
Fantastic. Yes. And we will definitely link to all those things in the show notes because I'm sure people are going to be looking for them. I am definitely going to go download your workbook right now as I can see that being beneficial here in my family. So again, thank you so much for your time and your insight and wisdom. It was very, very helpful.
My greatest pleasure, Elizabeth. Thank you.
If you are looking for more ways to build communication skills in your kids, grab our free mini lesson on how to craft a polished and professional speech out of thin air, along with 52 fun prompts so your kids can practice every single week. You can find that along with info about our upcoming public speaking and debate courses for kids at greencommunicationsedu.com.